Hey friends, it's April, which is absolutely wild to me. So today in my video, we are going to be chatting about all the books that I read in March and the last few books that I read in the end of the month of February, because my February check-in, roundup, whatever you want to call it, I ended up filming and putting out before the last few days of the month because I was going to be heading out of town and was busy. And I ended up cramming in a couple more books at the end of February, so we're going to talk about those. And I'm also going to give you a few updates as just what happened in my month of March. So let's jump into all of the books that I read, kind of how I felt about them, and if I think that they're worth your time. So when I finished my February roundup, I was saying that I had just finished reading Crescent City, was still very much in my romantasy era. I'm still living there, and it's been great. So the first thing I ended up reading following Crescent City in the end of the month of February was the From Blood and Ash series by Jennifer L. Armentrout, and I felt a little weird about this trilogy when I jumped into it, mostly because I wasn't super on board with our female protagonist, whose name is Poppy. It is a scenario in which she is a maiden. That is a very important part of her persona and is very integral to this world that she lives in. The world that she is in is one where there's a group of people called the Ascended who pretty much rule everywhere that she is a part of in her kingdom, and then there is the opposing faction called the Dissenters, but of course we don't know all that much about them until we meet the love interest who comes in and of course is very suave and very handsome, and he is of course part of this opposing faction, which zero surprise there. It is a very common trope in romantasy and romance in general, I would assume. So I found that Poppy's character was a little bit irksome for the first couple books, but I really did like the male love interest named Castile. I thought he was well done. He was funny. And I liked a lot of the secondary characters in this world. I felt like she really hit her stride more so with secondary characters rather than her primary characters, which was interesting. But the thing that she did, which initially made me very upset, was that when you get to book 3, she leaves you on this massive cliffhanger and then goes into another series that's connected, but you gotta read that book first. And let me tell you, I was pissed when I got to that book, but then I was like, you know what? I'm gonna read it. So I picked up A Shadow in the Ember, which is book 1 of the Flesh and Fire series, and I was wrong. It was so good. I feel like Girlfriend needs to be hailed for this trilogy because this trilogy is so good. In terms of romantasy books that I've read, it has probably my favorite pairing, if not my second favorite pairing. Nyktos is a deity of death, and Sarah is, of course, our love interest in this story, our main badass female POV. I loved her. I loved the dynamic of this. And what's interesting is that these are characters that had been mentioned and alluded to in the first trilogy, and then she wrote a whole trilogy about them to kind of fill in the gaps. And then the series is still ongoing, so there is that, but it does weave in and out of what books you should read and what order you should read them in. So if you are going to read the books by Jennifer L. Armentrout, which would be the From Blood and Ash series and the Flesh and Fire series, please go to her website and check out the recommended reading order that she does. I will say I didn't follow it just because I got so pulled in to the prequel trilogy, and I loved it because it dealt so much with religion and gods, and I was just living for it. And the sexual tension in those books was 5 out of 5 because she did such a good job. Such a good job. If you are debating on reading this series and you give the first series a try and you think this might not be for me, please go try the prequel trilogy because I think it is so much better and definitely worth your time. The next 2 books that I read were a duology by Carissa Broadbent, Serpent and the Wings of Night, and The Ashes and the Star-Cursed King. Now, this was a bit of a leap for me in terms of where I was coming at from the Flesh and Fire series, because in terms of spice, Flesh and Fire is like a solid multiple peppers if we're doing the pepper analogy in terms of spice level. And also, I just straight up enjoyed it. And I had seen that this book duology, the Nyaxia stories, I'm not saying it correctly, but it's Nyaxia something, but these 2 books are very well loved on Book Talk. I believe that they were first independently published and they've garnered such a following that Tor has now picked them up and is republishing them, which is amazing because that is a lot of authors' dreams. So props and kudos to Carissa Broadbent. I found that this story was a bit more YA in terms of the way that it was told, and then had a few open door spicy scenes that almost felt out of place with the rest of the language that was used in the books. Our main character in these stories is Araya, who is, of course, our human character in this crazy world where it's mostly vampire based. There are, of course, like different groups of people that can do different things, but Araya was adopted at a very young age by this vampire king, and there is a tournament that you can enter into where if you win, you are granted any particular boon that you wish by this deity. And Araya, having been raised by vampires her whole life, wants to be connected and tied to her father for the rest of her life, because that means she will gain eternal life without having to be turned into a vampire, which in this world can be very precarious and most people don't survive it. Of course, this becomes kind of a Hunger Games type scenario in which everyone in this competition has to take out their competition by killing them, and as she's a human and she's going up against vampires, she's got to have some edge, you know, she's got to be extra special and make sure that it works. And she does that by pairing up with, of course, two vampires, one man, one woman. Of course, the man becomes her love interest, and of course, it's a great love story. So, of course, they fight their way through all of these people, so on and so forth, and it becomes a very political war battle thing where you learn the backstory of the oppressed people in this world, aka the humans, and then you learn the backstory of some of the oppressed vampires in this world. And book one kind of ends on a cliffhanger, and book two is all of the political strife and fighting and basically full out war that happens. And in and amongst all of these plot lines is the love story. So I enjoyed these books. I believe I gave them a 4-star each on Goodreads. I didn't love them as much as I was hoping to, based on just how much I've seen other people gushing about them. And maybe I just wasn't in the right headspace for it because I loved Flesh and Fire so much. But I'm still happy I read them. So if you're looking for a good, fun, vampire-ish story, these might be a good option for you. Okay, the next book that I read was King of Wrath. I was very misled by this book because on Goodreads, it's listed as fantasy romance. And it is not fantasy, it's just straight up romance. So I ended up reading a romance book and didn't really realize until 3/4 of the way through that we weren't getting any fantastical elements in this story. And it was a strange story. But the baseline premise of this book was that there is an arranged marriage that takes place between these two people. This is their engagement. It's an enemies to lovers trope. They really don't like each other until they really do like each other, and then they really like each other. I didn't know how I felt about it when I read it, and I didn't know how I felt about it when I finished it. I ended up giving it, I believe, 3 stars. I don't really want to say much about this book because it is a very well-loved book. I know the romance community is very fond of it, and they are fond of the author. I think she's a great writer, honestly. In terms of the sexual tension, the explicit content in her books, I found that the way she wrote them to be very natural and appropriate. In terms of the language that she used, she's using proper anatomy, which I always appreciate in my books. And I just didn't love the main characters. I just didn't connect to them very well. So all in all, good read if you like good quality writing. In terms of being super enamored with the main characters, probably not the strongest one. Now, I know what I'm about to say is going to garner some eye rolls probably, but I ended up then rereading A Court of Thorns and Roses, A Court of Mist and Fury, and Fourth Wing. I really just wanted something fun and quick and easy, and a podcast that I absolutely adore. I had one of the hosts on for a Love Bomb chat. I'll link it, even though my video gave out in the middle of recording it, which was devastating. And it is the Fantasy Fangirls podcast. They have been reading their way through ACOTAR, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to read it and like keep pace with them. And did I keep pace with them? Absolutely not. I just blew through that book as I did the first time, had a great time reading it again, and then I was like, you know what? I'm going to go read ACOMAF for the 3rd time since the beginning of February. I have a major problem because I'm already wanting to reread it again because I love it so much. It's just such a fun book and I just adore it. So I'm not going to talk about those books anymore because I feel like I've talked about them enough. Fourth Wing was a fun reread just because I wanted to read it again. And of course, if you are very much involved in the Empyrean world, Rebecca Yarros released the title of the third book and the date that it is going to be coming out, and Onyx Storm is the name of that book. So if you are involved in that series, you can go pre-order it now and get really excited. And of course, like a sane person, you can probably reread them closer to the release date and not in March of the previous year like I just did. But that's okay. I then started another series. I believe the series itself is called the Lady of Darkness series, but that might also just be the name of the first book. And that is by an author whose name is escaping me right now. It's Melissa, I believe, Rorich. I'm going to put the name up here to make sure that I have it correct, but my internet just went out because we are getting crazy storms, so I can't check it right now. But I read the first book of the series where our main POV is a girl named Scarlet. She's 19, and she is, of course, an assassin. We've been through this plot before in our romances, and of course, she meets a guy, he trains her, got a dark and mysterious past, their stories intertwine, and it actually ended up being a really enjoyable read. I had read several Goodreads reviews of this book before I read it, and a lot of people are angry with this series in the fact that they felt that the first book in particular was very much a carbon copy of Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas, and that the author kind of just subbed in different plot lines and names, but overall the themes were very much the same. I had to disagree with that in the first book because I believe that this assassin ideology, or having our main POV be a trained lethal killer by the time that she's 19 and there's no one else better than her at this in the world, is fairly common in YA romantasy and then new adult romantasy. So I wasn't too upset about it. I ended up liking a lot of the characters that she brought into this world, and it's probably the most successful love triangle that I've seen where you're actively rooting for both male characters. So I thought that was really well done. My issues came when I read book 2, which was Lady of Shadows, in that it wasn't a carbon copy of Throne of Glass. It, for me, was far too similar to A Court of Mist and Fury, which I had just reread. So it was very fresh in my brain, and I was able to navigate my way through the story and going, okay, we're really taking from this story and trying to make it our own. So I struggled with that quite deeply, and I ended up DNFing the series after the second book. I will say that I feel she's a good author. The potential is there. I hope that she continues writing stories, but maybe she leans into something that's more uniquely her own. I'm not entirely sure. I felt a little bit let down by book 2. I don't want to say too many bad things about it because I don't like talking negatively about authors on my channel. So all in all, if you're interested in something that is very similar to ACOTAR and that world, that series, it might be a very good choice for you. Now, the last book that I completed in the month of March was Bride by Ali Hazelwood. I ended up doing a vlog about it. I'll link that here, so I'm not going to say too much about it. Wasn't what I was expecting, is pretty much all I'm going to say about that. But then I had started another book that I didn't end up finishing in that month, but I have since finished because it's April. So I guess I'll just kind of throw that in here. It was Spark of the Everflame by Penn Cole, which is the first book of the Kindred saga, I believe, or Kindred Curse saga, something like that. Penn Cole is an independent author. She is a romantasy author, fantasy author, and I thought this was a solid first book to a series. The ending kind of took me by surprise, so I'm not sure how I feel about it. I finished it last night, so I'm still in the midst of processing it, so I don't really want to say too much about it. But if you're looking for a fun, quick, and easy read, that might also be a good option for you. In terms of things that I got up to in the month of March, we were lucky in that we had a trip planned at the beginning of the month of March. We went to New York, my husband and I. We ended up seeing Moulin Rouge on Broadway. It was amazing. If you get a chance, please go see Derek Klena in Moulin Rouge, or pretty much anything, because he is hands down the best performer that we have ever seen. It was awesome. Also, if you need gluten-free food recommendations for New York, happy to help you out with that too. We also then had family come into town, visit, because it was my birthday last month, turned 34, and it was nice to see them. My mom ended up staying for a few weeks, which was great because I had extra childcare, And in that time, I wrote a book. So I have been toying with this one particular idea for about 5 years. It was just never really working out the way that I wanted to. And then when I started reading Romantasy at the beginning of the year, I was like, you know what? This really works as a Romantasy story. So I sat down on March 7th and decided to start typing, and pretty much didn't stop until a couple nights ago when I felt like the first draft was complete. The story right now is sitting at around 140,000 words. It is so fun. I'm so happy that I've done it. I'm now going to go back in, start reviewing, hopefully find an editor very soon, and then see what happens from there. But had such a wonderfully creative month in March, and I'm just so grateful to be able to have tapped into that that part of myself again, because it has felt like a very long time. I started writing a satirical fantasy last year that I hope to get back to at one point, or satirical sci-fi fantasy. And I love that story, but I just wasn't really feeling it. And I had gotten away from writing for a few months, came back to it, and this is my new baby, my new project. So hoping to get this out in the world at some point. So I'll keep you guys posted about that. I would love to get it traditionally published if that's the case. If not, I'm definitely going to be looking for avenues to independently publish it and get it into people's hands. But thank you so much for being a part of my month of March. If you watched some of my videos last month, and I don't really have anything planned for April other than the fact that Josh and I are planning to start our Song of Ice and Fire reread. Life has just been busy lately and hoping to get to that in the next week or so. In terms of what I'm going to be reading for the month of April, the only thing that I have planned is Tigana by Guy Gabriel Kay, because I am doing a buddy read with Joanna from Joanna Reads and Josh from Red Fury Books. They have pretty much become my Guy Gabriel Kay buddy readers, and I love having chats with them about it because they offer such wonderful insight to the prose and the story itself. So be on the lookout for that. I will keep you in the loop as to whose channel that conversation will be on. If this is your first time here, thanks for stopping by. I appreciate you spending your time with me. If you want to help out the channel, you can always hit like and subscribe. If you want to come hang out with me on Discord, my Discord information is in the info box down below, as well as my Instagram, Goodreads, all that fun stuff if you want to keep up with what I am reading in the middle of these monthly catch-ups. As always, thanks, and I'll see you next time. Bye.